meeting tonight. I'm glad that you all came. Also want to thank everybody that took part in our walking tour on October 8th. It was a tremendous success. Robert chaired the committee for it, our vice president standing back there with the camera. Jim Sweeney happens to have another engagement tonight, so had to leave, so Robert's doing double duty. But we had about 125 people that went around and toured the different establishments. There were 10 different businesses open, and we gave the history of them, and it was quite a success. Everybody was very pleased with it, I think. Also, the bookstore had a big exhibit upstairs that was manned by some of our volunteers. We had about 40 volunteers that helped with it that day, plus the ones that tried to set it up ahead of time. Let's see, the other things that we have are, and last month we met at Grace Church. Grace Church is having a continued history of the church. They're doing the rest of them on Sundays. They've asked me to announce. And this next one is at this next Sunday at noon, and it's the famous Women of Grace Church in the history of the church in 150 years. And I don't think we know back 150 years what the women were doing in the church. But they were taking care of the altar. The Dutchess County Historical Society in Wiltatum is continuing the tavern tours, and this next one is up in Pine Plains. It's at the whiskey place up there, and I'm not sure what the name of it is. It's
Dutchess, I think.
Dutchess Spirits, and
Yes.
that's a raid. They're going to do a raid on the 29th of October, Prohibition raid. And that should be fun. And then there's going to be another one in November they've added, and that's going to be at Beekman Tavern in Rhinebeck. Okay. And the other thing is that we're doing we're talking about changing our mission statement and our bylaws and the name. We will have copies of these changes put out at different locations. We're going to have them at the Village Hall, the Town Hall, the library, and possibly the bookstore. We'll have copies out there so that you can go in and look at them and see the changes, what it was before and what it is now. And then next month we will vote on them. They have to be voted on at the annual meeting. And next month will be our annual meeting. Okay? All right, and I don't think there's anything else. If anybody has anything else?
One question. When next meeting, when we're gonna vote on that, only the people that are paid up dues can vote, right?
That's correct.
It's not just the general.
Okay. Not to hold everybody up any longer, Stan, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you, and you can introduce and lead the rest of the program. Thank everybody for being here tonight and being part of this.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Diane, for that introduction, and it's nice to be back in the society and standing up front and being given a few chances to say a couple of words. As many of you know, I'm the immediate past president of the society. In fact, I've served 2 terms as your president. And I'm delighted to help bring this evening's program to you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, my fellow veterans, for taking the time and the energy and the thoughtfulness to be with us to share some of their feelings, their thoughts, and their reflections upon military service. I will have a time later on, I guess, to talk about what I did in the military. But you're going to hear the military histories of each of these gentlemen at the front. We do have women involved in the military. We actually do, believe it or not. But we don't have that many who are veterans. And so we're lucky to have a couple of folks in it. Unfortunately, They're not able to be with us tonight, but let me assure you, this is not a male type of thing exclusively by any stretch of the imagination. Well, let me tell you a couple words about how we got to tonight's program and why. Well, last November, as this board of directors for the society normally does, we meet in a very social setting for a couple of hours, and we say, well, okay, what should we have for next year's program? And as usual, the board did a fine job in picking out 9 different programs and venues for 2016. Tonight's October. We don't have meetings in the summer, in December. So this is in fact the 8th of the 9th programs for the Society for 2016. And when we got all done, we had, in fact, 8 of the 9 slots pretty well filled. There was that one opening. And I said, you know, what should we do? This is perhaps a little different, educational, well, maybe different. And it occurred to me that the Society puts together a string of outstanding presentations. Presentations in a wide variety of historical topics for our village of Millbrook, for the town of Washington, and for the regional Hudson Valley. And we don't limit ourselves just to the village and the town. We do strike out and cover other topics in the Hudson Valley and even in New York State. It's a wonderful thing, and I think our board of directors does a fine, fine job. What occurred to me last November was that we hadn't had a program, however, that featured a certain type of individual. And what I'm talking about is that normally we would have a presenter of some repute. Could be a teacher, lecturer, author, maybe a politician, maybe a small group of local people, as we've had a couple of times during the last couple of years, talking about focused topics right here within the village of Millbrook. What struck me was these are all individuals who study history, who understand it, who can pull materials together to make a presentation that's educational, informative, and fun. But what to me was missing was the element of, well, what about those people who make history? And it occurred to me, since I'm a military person, military background going back 300 and 400 years in my family, is that the military, by their nature of service, and the time they spend, and the energy, and everything that goes with it, they're the ones who create history. We thought, why not have military night? First of all, we hadn't had a military night in a long time, or featuring a military theme. And the idea came to us that let's have some actual veterans here tonight. Veterans who have gone, they've served, they've done their stuff, and they've come home to talk about it. Not all people who go into the service come home. I think you know that. That's one of the sad elements of war. But that's what it's about. There are 2 organizations in the Millbrook area that have veterans. One is officially called the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW. VFW is, I believe, all of us, all the 5 of us sitting here right now. And we have all been to a foreign land to participate in a war, a conflict. And I would venture that probably all 5 of us have been shot at. Fact of life. John Kading, I believe, is a American Legion.
Commander of the American Legion.
American Legion. So we have the head of
That
it.
was in 1922.
Right.
15 members.
Exactly. Now, the only difference between the American Legion and the VFW is we happen to go to the battlefield, and most of the members of the American Legion didn't. That's not their fault. They made their sacrifice, they made their contribution. They're every bit as valued as anyone else, as far as military service and veteran service goes. Well, that's how the program came about. We thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a program featuring the people who have actually gone and served and made their contribution and have brought the tale home. Now tonight's program is unscripted. I don't know what these gents are going to say. They don't know what I'm going to say.
We don't know what we're going to say.
But you know, good. But you know, one of the things about history is that it's told from a human perspective of those who were there. They did it. As they say, been there, done that. Spontaneity of what they offer is really the prize of the night. And so with that in mind, that's how we got to where we are. These gentlemen have volunteered to be here with us tonight. Originally, we thought there might be a couple more, but sickness and vacations and there are all sorts of stuff why people can't come. But I do thank my fellow veterans for being here tonight, and John Kading as well. My good friend Walt Jacob, who is a fellow U.S. Navy veteran. I believe he served in the submarine force. He is the official leader of this group tonight, and I'm going to turn the program over to Walt to introduce the speakers, and we'll just see what happens. The audience is free to make questions and ask questions at any time. You may interrupt the speaker, just raise your hand.
Wait, I wasn't prepared for questions.
Oh, you weren't? He's been to war, been shot at, but okay, a couple of questions. Thanks, Brian. Okay, John, let's start off the evening. Walt, go ahead.
Okay, I'm the quartermaster of the VFW post right here, and I was elected to run it, so. Sorry to say we don't have any World War II veterans with us tonight, but we do have two that served during the career time period. We have Cold War veterans, and we have two from Vietnam and one from Iraqi freedom. So you'll get an overview of some of the things that have been going on. And basically, I guess we'll just start off with Stan.
Back on the feet. Okay, fine.
Quick Vietnam.
Well, I didn't plan to be a featured speaker tonight. The idea was you hear enough of me already in other capacities, but we have a little time, and yes, I'd be very glad to do it. My military service began in 1966. I've been married a year, had 2 degrees under my belt, bachelor's and a master's. I was a teacher in a high school up in Granville, New York, right on the Vermont border. Been married a year to my beautiful wife, who I loved then and love even more now. We've been married 51 years, but in any case, we had just been married the preceding year. And as a teacher in New York State, come May of 1966, I got a letter in the mail, as they say, the New York State Education Department, saying, Stan, thanks for being a teacher in our system, but we will not and cannot accept your master's degree, which was earned by a university from another state. Those were the standards New York had back in the 60s. So I said, uh-oh, what am I going to do? And they said, well, you've got an alternative. You're either going to leave teaching, or you're going to go back to grad school and get a New York State master's degree. What would you do? Well, we contemplated that, but we got by that pretty quickly. It turns out I was one of the more fortunate people. Maybe that era, maybe of all eras. But Mary's dad was then a commander in the Naval Reserve. And he and I had a night chat, and he said, look, he says, you're up against a rock and a hard place. Maybe what you ought to do is consider going into the military rather than going back to grad school. He said, if you do that, he said, yeah, Vietnam's coming up, you probably have to go. He said, if you take advantage of your degrees, even though New York didn't want the master's degree, that's fine. He said, I'll bet you can get into officer candidate school in the Navy. So I applied very quickly, and even more quickly, got accepted. That was in the middle of 1966. They were looking for bodies, believe me. So I went to OCS. Mary and I departed Granville, went over to Newport. We spent 4 months over there, and I got my commission in November. I was immediately posted to a U.S. Naval destroyer in Mayport, Florida. I'm a Northeast boy. I'm not used to that hot weather down there. It was terrible. In any case, I didn't have to worry about the weather too much because my little destroyer was known as a Greyhound. That's what they called destroyers. They're always on the go. And in the next couple of years, I logged over 60,000 miles at sea, going all over the world in Atlantic, Pacific, whole 9 yards, doing everything possible that you can do on a ship. A lot of travel experience, very exciting, very much fun. For newlywed, newly away from my wife, man, that was pain. But we got through it. And when the tour was over, we had a couple weeks off. And I was immediately posted to Vietnam for my second tour. Fine. I was one of the, I guess, I don't know, maybe, I don't think it was that common to have 2 tours in Vietnam at the time, but yeah, I was lucky. I drew 2 tours. So one was off the coast for about 4 or 5 months on the destroyer. The other tour was in country 13 months. And I was very fortunate to get posted to Saigon, now known as Ho Chi Minh City. My boss, my immediate boss, was, wow, again, talk about luck. My immediate boss was the top admiral in Vietnam, and I reported directly to him. I was his command briefing officer for intelligence and operational handling of matters. Got to see a lot of personalities in the United States as they came through. Tell you, once you start a war, the politicians will flock to the war zone for publicity and exposure and so on. And boy, they came hand over fist. And they all had to be briefed and told what was going on and escorted and so on. So I had a pretty good job. But you get out in the field, you get some shot at occasions, and I made several trips out of the field with my admiral. It was a good tour, as opposed to some of the tours that I've heard about and read about, and I certainly briefed over there. War's not fun, it's messier than the dickens. No fun at all. Well, that ended in November of '69, came out, and went to work for IBM in a civilian capacity. Something about that Navy had grabbed me already. And I went back, had another chat with my father-in-law. He said, you know, you've got 4 years under your belt. You can have a career after 20 and retirement and whatever goes with it. So I thought, what the heck, let's give it a fly. And we did. And so joined, in fact I joined my father-in-law's unit and then moved up from there. 20 years turned into 30. And I spent 30 years total in the military, and I haven't regretted an hour, a day, or a minute of it. It's been a wonderful experience. In the reserve career, luckily I was able to advance in the ranks, and by the end I had the rank of captain in the U.S. Navy. I was also posted twice to commanding officer slots in the Naval Reserve, and 1 slot as a chief of staff. All in what's called the intelligence area. It's a specialty, can't talk about it, but that's what we do. That's my exposure. I've never regretted my military service. One thing I neglected to say in my opening remarks. 3 weeks to give the chance to vote for the U.S. presidency. Quite frankly, I don't care how you vote. I know I am, I know Mary is, fine. The idea is, your vote didn't come easy, it didn't come soft. And it's people like the folks sitting in front of this room right now that brought you the option. The availability of voting, for one thing, and having the free speech and First Amendment rights that we enjoy day to day in our society. Believe me, there are a lot of people in this world, millions of people, who do not have the freedom to vote, or the freedom of speech. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox, aren't I? My apologies, but that's how I feel about it. And it's thanks to folks like this that we all enjoy the quality of life that we have in our community and in our society. Okay, I've mouthed off enough here. Walt, take over this.
Wayne Burkhart, Navy CB, Vietnam era.
I don't know if you know what a CB is. Anybody saw the John Wayne movie, Fighting CBs? Remember the career? Well, we'll go back in time here. Back 50 years back, I lived in Wassaic, And on a Friday, I received my draft notice. On Monday, I found out I graduated from high school. So I wanted to go in the Navy. My brother was in the Navy. I went to the Navy. They said, well, you're too heavy. You gotta lose 63 pounds. If you pass their physical, we'll take you. Well, I managed somehow that summer to lose the weight. And in November of '66, inactive, 4-month inactive reserve. In March of the next year, I went to boot camp. Got out of boot camp in May as a construction apprentice,
Where was that?
Great Lakes.
Great, I was born there.
Yeah. And right after boot camp, I got married to my first wife, which I spent 42 and a half years married to her before she passed. And I wanted to join the Navy because I thought, well, that's the best way to keep from going to Vietnam. Well, in December of '67, I was 10 miles south of DMZ working on a rock crusher. And I spent 9 months there. Then we rotate back to the States for 5.5 months. And we go back to a different location in Vietnam. We made 2 tours. It's Da Nang, and we had another rock crusher site 50 miles north at Phu Loc Quarry, which is south of Way Phu Bai, and I was there for the '68 Tet too. So in that whole 2 tours I made, I never fired a shot, but we definitely got fired rockets and artillery and mortar rounds. So when I finished my second tour, I got orders to Japan. And to get my wife over there, I had to re-enlist another 6 years. So I spent 10 years in the Navy. When I left there in '73, Nixon was in then, I had orders to Adak, Alaska, but my first wife had a bad back, and they said, well, if you have to fly there to Anchorage, you gotta pay the flight. So I got my everybody remembers Hamilton Fish? Condors? Well, he got my orders changed to Daylesford, Rhode Island, which was sea duty. And at that point, it was the first outfit was Mobile Construction Battalion 5. Then I was in Mobile Construction Battalion 1. I was 60 pounds too heavy to go to the South Pole. So I got sent to a detachment in Italy instead.
Oh, nice.
But the family was having problems, and
Where in Italy?
Gaeta, about 40 miles north of Naples.
Right, Gaeta.
And building a recreation center for the flagship of the Mediterranean Fleet, the Little Rock. And after that, we came back. I had to come home because of family problems with the kids. My first son was born in Japan, and he was home. And they decided whoever was Senator Rivers was the Armed Forces Service, none of that then. But anyway, they were closing that base down. He was from Mississippi, so everybody getting shipped to Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi. So from there, I made another 9-month tour to Okinawa, back to the States for another 5.5 months. Went to Roosevelt Rose and in Puerto Rico, and I still had a weight problem, so they said, well, we're gonna let you out. You know, and that's when Vietnam was wearing down, so it was starting to be a peacetime Navy. You know, they were dropping everybody then. But I spent 2 times trying to get out of the Navy for the family. No, couldn't do that. But for an extra 60 pounds, you can get out. So that's what I did. And I went in as a E2, got out as a first-class construction mechanic. So, one part of it, I wished I'd stayed in for the 20 from my pension, but I figured I was going to lose my family. And my second child was born in Rhode Island. You know, they kind of blame mother for putting daddy on an airplane all the time. So, that's basically what it was. The only thing I can say is I never fired a shot, you know, and I look back and 53,000 men that didn't make it back, I said, you know, why was I so lucky?
Did you have any background in construction, or did they teach you?
No, I did. I guess I just passed the, whatever the equivalency test, you know, when you first went up there. You almost look like the Iowa test. You got all these little squares you had to fill out. And come to find out, I was already designated as a CB when I left the recruiter's office, but didn't know it till my 7th week in Great Lakes. So when you get there, you get blue stripes. The fleet gets red, green, and white stripes. You know, it's just what the outfits are done. So, that's the extent of it.
So the world.
What are your thoughts on outdoor service having served?
Pardon?
What are your overall thoughts of having served and being a veteran?
I learned a trade, for one. A little bit disappointed in our reception back during the Vietnam years.
Yeah.
I feel more teared up when I see the reception I get now. And, they helped me out when my wife died, and I joined them, and been here since 2010. Good bunch of boys, guys.
I'm still classified under the first one.
Well,
You know, I think you're hitting on a point. It's something that you can only experience by having done it. But one of the things that I've experienced, and I think we all as vets have experienced over the years, is that when you go into a room with other vets present, and you realize who's there, and the fact that he or she has served and you've served, there is instant camaraderie and fellowship. It's doesn't matter what your backgrounds are, your education, your ethnicity, your religion, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You're vets. You've served, you've given. And I tell you what, every time I go into a social setting, I love running into fellow vets. And I think that's what you were getting to.
If I could add something too.
Yes, Paul.
What Wayne said about helping. If you know anybody who's a vet, that's what we're here for, is to help each other. And I think we've done a pretty good job in a number of places, and we're constantly looking for other vets to join us, and especially the younger guys too, or older guys, but we're there to help. So if you know anybody, just tell them, second Thursday of any month, 7:30.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
7
sorry.
o'clock.
7 o'clock.
This was recruiting officer.
Yeah, the VFW meets the same night and almost the same time as we do. They meet at 7 o'clock on the third Thursday. We meet at
Next
7
door.
I'm sorry, next door.
Second Thursday.
Second Thursday, my apologies, thank you very much. And it's right next door. Yes, the stone building, right.
Oh,
What's that? It was the original wood shop and metal shop for the old high school.
Blacksmith shop.
Blacksmith shop, yes.
Next we have Brian Foley, Army, Iraqi Freedom, 2 tours.
How we all doing? I'm gonna make it a little exciting. How many of you have kids that are my age? Or grandkids that are my age? I'm 31.
My kids are older than that.
I know they are, John. So, back in 2002, just after 9/11, I was 16, just getting ready to turn 17, and, you know, after being on a plane on 9/11, you know, and just watching the TV screens at the Kansas City airport and getting grounded for days on end and travel being the mess that it was, felt obligated to serve my country, but, you know, how can I not go active duty but still maybe have a chance of going to college? So the opportunity to join the Army National Guard in New York came up. So, hey, you know, my father's a middle-class worker, and maybe they can't afford the university that I want to go to, so I'm going to free them up, and they're going to pay for it. Right on. Cool. So I enlisted in February 2002 between my junior and senior year of high school. It was in my contract that I had to graduate high school with a diploma, not a GED. I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, came back, lean, mean, fighting Green Machine. Graduated and got shipped down to Fort Gordon, Georgia for signal support system specialist training for 9 months. That was being a northern boy, like Stan said, and going down to the south was eye-opening, to say the least. Food is fantastic, though. From there, I came back that November of '03 and started working and going to school. They were paying for it. And April 2004, I remember it was like it was yesterday. I was actually sitting in front of working for Tom Petruzzo at CarQuest, sitting in front of the store, just got back from a delivery, and I got a phone call from my sergeant major. You sitting down? No, I'm at work. No, seriously, you need to sit down. Okay. So he said, you just drew orders to go to Iraq. I was 19 years old. No, I'm sorry, I was 18 years old. So I ended up getting transferred to that unit, which was an Army liaison team out of Valhalla. I was originally stationed with 156 Field Artillery in Kingston. And went to Valhalla. Trained up there and got to meet a bunch of great guys, and our deployment kept getting delayed. We're going to go in July. We're going to go in August, September, October. Finally, we get on the bus to go to Fort Benning in Georgia. Back down south where the food is great. We spent about a good month and a week there and getting trained up, because at that time in '04, a lot of units were getting blown up on the road. Taking, they don't know who the enemy is. They aren't wearing a uniform. They're just hiding behind the concrete going da 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 da. So we trained up on that, urban warfare trained up, because back when I went through basic training, we were still learning Cold War tactics. It's unfortunate. But, train up was good. We landed boots on the ground in Baghdad in January 7th, 2005. I spent a little over a year in Baghdad. My capacity didn't serve doing my job. I was a liaison team member with the National Joint Operations Center for the Iraqi government. At that point, I was an E4 specialist doing a 03 captain's job. Now, not that type of captain, that's like colonel captain in my realm. Doing a job that I had to learn on the fly, reporting to higher. Then we started going out on missions, kicking down doors with the Iraqi police commandos, sitting in the back. Because I was an EMT at the time, I got the combat lifesaver status, got to carry a little baggie. One of the best stories I have, and we were in a mission and an Iraqi troop came back and he got shot because he was a little overweight and his vest didn't fit him, so it kind of skimmed him. And I had to dress his wound, and believe it or not, tampons work really good for 7.62 rounds. So I dressed him up, and the rest is another gruesome story. But I did my time in Baghdad, my first tour, and I had a lot of fun at some points and a lot of low spots. Going out on missions, chasing a suicide bomber with a vest on that dresses like a woman and goes to hospitals threatening to blow it up. And he leaves minutes before you get there, and you're chasing a ghost. And that's what we were. We were chasing a ghost for a while. And in '05 was probably one of the bloodiest years that they had, until a couple years later. So I came back in '06, and we came back. I flew into JFK. Mom, Dad, brother, sister picked me up from the airport, and all fine, dandy. Let's go home. I want to go home. It's cold in January when you come back from being over there. Now in the summertime over there, 135 degrees, you walk 10 feet, you sweat your gear out. In the wintertime, it drops to about 90 degrees, you're cold in the summer, maybe 110. The wintertime, the high is about 80, you're cold, and it drops down to about 70s, and you're freezing. It's beautiful weather, dry, it's nice, it's sandy, nice sand, gets everywhere. So I came home, and when I came home, they didn't know what to do with us. And this is what made me upset. You know, I was 20 years old at the time, coming home, and a lot of them, you know, they kind of just, we'll see you in 3 months at your next drill. No reintegration, just like they dropped us off the bus stop and welcome back to the real world, make it on their own. And, you know, what they say is actually true, you know, stuff that you hold back, you think you're a great big hero, veteran thing, but you hold a lot of things back and you feel different when you walk amongst the rest of the population. I learned that real fast. The other thing I learned, I didn't have college debt like all my classmates had. It's true though. It was tough to walk, you know, your hypervigilance was another thing. So I decided to go back into society, got a job at IBM working as a firefighter with their emergency control department, and did that for a little while until I had the bright idea. I missed it so much. Hey, why don't we go back again? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I volunteered myself and got a promotion out of it. I got promoted to sergeant. I was landed in country on Halloween of 2007. And flying in from Kuwait on a Black Hawk helicopter, getting stationed down near the Persian Gulf in the southern province of Basra, going to a prison camp full of a bunch of evil people on the other side of camp that want to do nothing but kill you, really makes a pucker factor, lack of better words. But flying on that Black Hawk helicopter, we were doing, you know, you think going straight, no, we were going sideways, doing this through the air. It was kind of scary. I was thinking I was going to crash. So when I got to my second tour and got landed on the ground and got set up, I was night shift NCOIC, responsible for over 150 combat platform trucks, communications within those trucks, for the Air Force, nonetheless. That tour was about 6 months, 7 months. It was, you know, again, had its high times, had its low times. The best part of that tour, I got to go out with the Brits. I went on a 2-week mission and believe it or not, that part of Iraq is very flat except for this little spot called Safwan Hill, outside the village of Safwan. And I got to hang out down there with the Brits. The Brits can drink in country. We couldn't. So I was allowed 2 beers a night, which was bonus. That was probably the best highlight of that tour. And I came back March of '08, went back to work and assimilated through life and had my fair share of issues, and coming back and being 23 years old, 24 years old, and trying to figure out what your purpose is. Try going back to school, and you know, that was the other thing. I was trying to go to school through all this. Every time I went to go to Dutchess, oh, you gotta go here. Oh, you gotta go there. Okay. Not a big deal, although I did take an online class offered through Dutchess while I was in Baghdad. But the worst thing about it, the power outages. I was 8 to 9 hours ahead, so all my assignments were getting screwed up. So trying to figure out when I have to submit my assignment, I wasn't getting the right amount of time. So I worked out a deal. But my time in such a young age, looking back on hate to say it, guys, the old timers that went before me, you know, especially the Vietnam guys that came back and the way they were treated when they got back, started to become full circle again. And it's sad seeing seeing a lot of guys that I've seen go over for a third, fourth, a fifth time, coming back more run down, issues of alcoholism and drug use and suicide rate of 22 a day. And it really puts a lot of things into perspective. And at a young age, I had no choice but to put everything into perspective. So, well, I gotta get a reference to my card, hold on. Overall reflection, shit, it was, where I served, yeah, did that. Reason for, yeah, did that. Overall reflection on service. What's that mean?
How do you feel about having served?
Oh, the time that I served? Best 7 years of my life. Other than, you know, some downfalls and whatnot, but I tell you what, even though I was a part-time soldier, you know, 1 week a month, 2 weeks a year, I had a blast. Some of the guys that I was overseas with, I still talk to. My one buddy up in Odessa, New York, we try to visit at least once a year. He either comes down, well, he's still yet to come down, but I keep going up there. I can assume because the beer's cold and the cheese is free. But, you know, we keep in contact. Another buddy of mine, he just got promoted to lieutenant in NYPD down in Brooklyn. He's loving life and whatnot. I talked to a few others, and a few others from my second tour I still keep in contact with. And, you know, you run into them every once in a while at the bar, 'cause we were all local. We all kind of grew up around the same area, a couple from Pine Plains, Poughkeepsie. We see each other out, oh, you know, hey, how's it going? It's like we picked up where we left off, like without skipping a beat. And that's what was fun. And I wouldn't have given it up. If I had to do it all over again, probably do the same 7 years with the same decisions, the same choices that I made. It was an awesome experience. I think I'm good. Any questions?
You still single?
No, I'm actually married. I forgot my wedding ring.
So you're hitched.
Huh?
You're hitched.
Yeah, I got married 3 years ago to an awesome wife. I
Oh,
can't believe
good.
she puts up with me.
Good. Good.
Yes, I guess.
Oh, she puts up with you, that's
I don't know why.
That's good.
Now, I'm in my current career now, and I love what I do. I'm a union steam fitter.
Where do you work?
Right now, I'm working in Orange County, but my local is Dutchess, Putnam, Ulster,
Steam
and Westchester.
fitter?
Yeah. So it's a fun job.
Good.
I get to melt metal with fire and electricity. What's better than that?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
In fact, the next thing you list are Cold War veterans. In spite of the name, it really wasn't a Cold War. There were deaths, there was fighting, and there were things going on. So. But, well, Skip Dixon served in Germany.
All right, I graduated school right here, 1954. Went 2 years of college in, it's now SUNY Canton. It was ATI, and we were on the same campus, St. Lawrence University. I got out from there and I worked for my father. I tried to enlist in the service. They wouldn't take me because when I was 6 years old, I was run over by a truck and fractured skull, paralyzed left side. I was unconscious for 29 days. So didn't think anything more about service. Well, come April of '59, I got draft notice. The night before I was going to Albany, I was at Vassar Hospital having my appendix out. So they said it'd be 6 months deferment. Well, it was 4 months. Go to Albany and going with physical, he says, we don't know about you, we gotta send you a couple doctors. So I was up there 2 more days. The doctors they sent me was 2 psychiatrists. I sat in a recliner chair for 6 hours a day. It says you're physically fit. So I get orders to go to Fort Dix. I'm down to Fort Dix the third week on a PT test. I double over, is in the hospital. They want to give me a medical discharge. At that time with a medical discharge, every 6 months you had to go back for a physical. And if you passed the physical, you had to go back to finish your 2 years. I says, you got my ass in here, you gotta do something with it. So I was on light duty. I went through basic training, driving a deuce and a half to take food to the troops in the field. I did qualify on M1, BAR, carbine, 45, and machine gun. And then I was in the holdover company. Didn't know what to do with it. Found out I was a plumber. They were closing down the 3rd Training Regiment at Fort Dix. I had 2 sergeants working for me, draining out the barracks. Then I got orders for advanced infantry training. I was still on light duty. Did the same things for the next 8 weeks. Finished that up, got orders for Germany. Went out of Brooklyn on a troop ship. We were 10 days going over. We had a 2-day stop in Southampton, England. And then we went to Bremerhaven, got on a train to go to Augsburg. Had no idea where that was or anything. And I get in Augsburg, go to personnel, and the clerk in personnel says, can you type? I said, took type, that's gonna be good enough. You're gonna be a company clerk down the company. So I had that, and I decided I was gonna come home Christmas time, so I had to bring another guy in for the company clerk's job. And went back over, walked in after I come back from here in the States, and the executive officer says, you've got a military driver's license, I need a Jeep driver. So I got the job driving his Jeep. And he says, you're the sightseeingest damn driver I ever did have. Because we were going out on a maneuver, and he's got the map there. He says, there's where we gotta go. I said, isn't that right over there? Yeah, well, the road went way out like this and over like this. I dropped a 4-wheel drive, take off across the field. So, the way I was able to get in the VFW, the last month I was in Germany, or last 2 months, we were in Munich at first in Millbrook. It was where the massacre was with the Olympics,
Yes.
with the Laos crisis. And I got orders to come back home, come back on a troop ship. Coming back, we dropped anchor for 19 hours, 1,000 miles south of Newfoundland, waiting whether they're coming home or going back, because with the Berlin Wall went up. Well, I get home. I was kind of, I don't know how you put it, but even with not seeing much firepower or anything, but you can't come home and go right and settle right down. I got home it was the 1st of August, and a friend of mine who lives down the Clove now, his aunt, when I went to service, his aunt had a camp at Sacandaga Reservoir, and we used to go up there on weekends to go to Fondant stock car races. Well, he gave a call about Wednesday before Labor Day, let's go up to camp this weekend. Okay. Saturday night we were going to go to Fonda Fair. This girl standing there. I'd thrown her in the lake before I went to service. She was 15 then. I was 23. And didn't think anything about it. And I asked her if she wanted to go to Fonda Fair with me. Yeah, I'll go with you. So went to Fonda Fair on Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, went stock car races over outside of Albany. And she said she had junior achievement on Wednesday night in Schenectady. I was sitting over at diner about 6:30 Wednesday night. Shoot, I'm gonna go to Schenectady and pick her up from junior achievement. Did, got engaged 23rd December, married the July 7th, that's 54 years ago. And I got, right after we got married, I was in reserves then. We were married a month at Camp Drum, and I was company clerk in the reserve unit up there. I was in a cot here, the first sergeant in a cot about 2 foot from me, the executive officer was in a cot about 2 foot from the first sergeant. The telephone was sitting right here alongside of me, and the lightning hit 5 miles up the road. The guy where it hit got killed, but I was still in my sleeping bag and on top of the executive officer, 6 foot from where I was going. And then the reserve unit in Poughkeepsie moved to Kingston, and I had less than 6 months to go with the reserves, and I was able to get out, and we got married. It was the 7th of July, 1962. And I'm a little unusual. I've got, the house I'm living in right now, I've got 80 years in it. And my grandfather had my house built in 1912 for $635. I was the first one in the Dixon side to go into service. My dad was drafted in 42, but he was a union electrician, and he ended up with 2 other guys, local guys, at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, on the Manhattan Project. And that was a big experience too. We spent a summer down there while he was down there. But in 71, I bought the business from my father, and 5 years ago, I retired after 4 bypasses. And my wife was, the day I was getting discharged, they said at 10 o'clock a snowstorm was coming in. And my wife comes in to pick me up, and they take me, I was at Vassar Hospital, they take me down to the door, and she'd gone up to get the car, and she ended up having to park on the top deck at Vassar, and had to take 6 inches of snow off the car. And we tried calling Mike Masserone, we couldn't get a hold of him up here to Dyson's. And Jody, she was Faith Van de Bogart, I don't know what her second husband's name is, but come in with her brother-in-law. Jody, can you give Mike a call? My wife said, can you give Mike a call and tell him Skip's coming home from the hospital? Well, we didn't know, and come home, well, I had to ride in the back seat. You couldn't be in the front seat with an airbag, because if the airbag go off, it would kill you. And come up the road, there's 2 plow trucks out in the road. The driveway was just as clear as this is right here. Pass shovel to the house. My wife was gonna back in. I said, no, drive in the garage. I better get off a dry concrete floor than a wet blacktop. And, no, it wasn't blacktop, it was dirt then. And you couldn't use your arms to get out of the car. You had to cross your arms like that, and you rocked, and inertia would, but then one guy got on the other side of the car and helped get me out. I stood there for a minute, and I said, good. And guy on each side of me took me in the house, and I get in the house, and I was go sitting on the sofa where I usually sit, It was so low I couldn't get out. My wife had to climb on the sofa, get over top me, put her arms under my armpits to lift me out. I didn't sit, it was 2 months before I was sat on that sofa again. But I only met one person that, when I was in the service, we went to the Oktoberfest in Munich, and before we got off the train and took the train with Subway and stopped in a bar, and all about from here to back where the camera is, a red-headed guy there talking quite a southern accent. I look at him. I go over to him, I says, "You Lyle Good?" Looks at him, "Skip Dixon?" First cousin from Virginia. And I didn't see him until another 20 years later, went down for one of his brother's children's wedding in Virginia. But all my son did go in the Navy for 6 years, but nobody on our side was ever in the service. It was all farmers. But all my cousins and down in Virginia, my mother's from Virginia, I had all kinds of, had one cousin graduated from Annapolis, and he ended up being, I think it was Attorney General in Charlottesville, Virginia. So, but it was such, I had a nephew was stationed in Frankfurt, West Point graduate. We've been married, it was in '86, we took off, went to Germany for 2 weeks. We rented a car, he dropped us off at his house. He went to the field, and then the second week, we went to Munich. I was stationed in Augsburg, and well, the girl was from Burbank, and husband, I don't know just where he was from. His father was ambassador to Iran, and my wife had done the wedding cake for her, and we stayed with them and did the Oktoberfest again, and went Garmisch and Dachau, back to Augsburg and stuff. And I'd love to go back there again. Just, it was.
I think you're saying what a lot of us have experienced, and I guess is most of it, is in the military you develop friendships and kind of.
I did meet on the troop ship coming back 4 guys I was in college with,
Yeah.
from up in the Adirondacks.
Right. Okay.
Your
Good.
turn now, Bob.
John, you wanna go?
Me?
Do you?
Sure, who else? Give me help, John.
I unfortunately have to take off. I haven't eaten dinner yet.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
After listening to Dick,
Yeah.
Skip, giving this talk, I guess I'm the oldest one. I was drafted in 1950. First one to come out of Millbrook. And I went in service in October. 2-year draft. Went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, for my basic training. Came back after basic training, says we're all shipping out. And at that time, it was the Korean thing, and I thought we were all on our way to Korea. But we went to Europe. And just like Skip did, when we go to Europe, we go to Bremerhaven, Germany. So here we are, all in Bremerhaven, and they call us up. He says, Katie, you're going to France Verdun, France. Now, if all the older people probably know Verdun, France, is where the big war was, the First World War. Well, that's where there was 5 of us, I think. And we were on the train and we were sent off to Verdun, France. I got in there and they said, you type? I said, yeah. I took a business course when I was there. So I became a company clerk, just like thing. And I was the guy that they always called to cut the emergency leave orders. And it was always, it seems like every day or every other day, John, we gotta put an order for going back to the States when somebody's sick or something. And that's the way it went. And I was promoted within a couple of months. Got my first strike, PFC. And then within another 3-4 months, I got corporal. And then the next thing, before I left, I got my sergeant's strike. I was ambitious, and they knew that I did my job. But the big part about my whole tour in the Army, and I still say today, if we had the draft today to put these young guys through our training like we did, I think half of our problems in our country today wouldn't be. I think there's too much freedom for our young people. At least I learned to respect our country. And you get to learn this by going about in the world and seeing how other countries live. And this is what the young people today do not know. They do not know what we have here, like just to pass on to you, I'll give you a little example. When my mother and father both came from Germany, my mother, they got engaged in Germany. She waited 18 months before she got a visa so she could come to America. When she came on the boat, my father went down to get her. And before she could come off the boat, they had to get their marriage license. And then they went and lived with my father's sister in Wingdale. But it's so interesting. See, 18 months. I don't think a girl here go in the service and then come back and still have your girlfriend. But anyway, that was my mom. What else I was gonna say? Oh. What I do want to say, when I came out of the service in 1952, September. And I'll never forget Skip Leeds, who was the adjutant at the Parker Hay Post, 260, says to me, you gotta become a member of the Legion. I never paid much attention to Legion or any of these things. But anyway, just to go back a step, I graduated in 1947 from the high school, and I took over the store on the 1st of July. On the 1st of July, I was in Washington, D.C. on our class trip. Thank you to my sister who stepped in and took over the store July 1st. My brother, who worked at the store also. I went in the service in 1950, and they ran the store for 2 years while I was gone, then I came back and so forth. That's my 8 minutes.
Thank you, John.
You got any questions? Well, thank you very much.
Well, then maybe if we have time.
I'd like to add one more thing on mine. On a troop ship coming back, we pulled in New York Harbor about 2 o'clock in the morning. And with that stopping south of Newfoundland, we had 4 guys jumped overboard, wanted to get on land. And when we went, they said, you'll be getting off the ship at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8 o'clock, as we were going down the gangplank, the 4 guys were standing there with a cast iron ball and a chain and it was 10:20 when I was out from the active duty. And they had, for $1, you could go to Idlewild, LaGuardia, Port Authority, Grand Central, or Newark Airport. Well, I always used to go to the Port Authority, take the A subway train to 168th Street, go down to the George Washington Bridge, stick my thumb up. Well, I had a $1 bill, which went for the bus, and I had 3 $100 bills. I tried to get it by a subway. Can't give it to you. I said, only got 2 more of them. Well, he handed me 2, he says, keep 1 for souvenir. I go down, stick my thumb up down there, and a young couple picked me up. They're from New York somewhere. They were going to Vermont, had 2, like 4 and 6-year-old boys in the back seat. I sat in the back seat with them, get chatting with them. And get up. The Quechuan restaurant used to be down south of the bridge on the Parkway, just after you went across the reservoir. We're stopped for dinner. I said, I'll have a cup of coffee. They fed us dinner at 10:30 in the morning in Brooklyn. Well, we go in. We want 2 hamburgers, 2 orders of French fries, 2 glasses of milk, and 3 steak dinners. How do you want your steak done? Well, I got off at 55 and walking over to 55, and state police had a roadblock. I look over there, Sam Cradell. Look at him a little bit better, it's Lieutenant Sam Cradell. I said, who are you? It's Skip Dixon, Chauncey Dixon's son. Dad wired his house up here on top of Maple Avenue in 1939. He's just got out of the service, heading home. Well, hop in, I'll take you home. Drop me off at the house, nobody's home. So I go up to Van Tassel's cousin next door. About 4:30, I looked down, the truck was back in the yard. The guy that worked for Dad, car was gone. I take off and go walk back down, get in the truck, and come up here to Millbrook, see what's going on. Park right in front of the diner. Jimmy Hart comes on the other side of the road. I want you to meet my fiance up in Hitchcock. Take off and go up there. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad get back. No Ernie's car, no truck in the yard. He ends up calling Bill Howell at Briggs's. Bill's house says, your truck's sitting here in front of the diner. They take off and come up the diner. They're walking around the truck. They never looked in the back to see my bag back there. We come back down the road and park on the other side. I stand on, looking over the car on Jimmy Hart's car. I says, you looking for something? You son of a bitch, you. And it was just, they were happy to see me, but they didn't know when we didn't know just when we were coming home. It was orders at last minute because it was when the Berlin Wall went up.
Thank you. Well,
I served in the U.S. Navy in submarines. The way I got started, I guess, was I grew up in a veterans project. After World War II, government set up housing for veterans, and there were 200 or 300 veterans in our community. My family had a piano, and so that every Friday night, that's where everybody gathered. And I can remember all night long piano playing, and it was a player piano, and a veterans gathering. And so, I mean, I got to know a lot of different people. And of course, TV at that time, the only thing we ever watched was Navy Log. There were 2 other Army shows, and Silent Service. And I think Silent Service, which is about submarines, was what kind of grabbed me. But went to a 2-year college, technical college that Connecticut had set up. I had an associate's degree. I got accepted to Northeastern. But at that time, if you got between schools, you got a letter. And that letter came saying, you know, I was going to be drafted. So I guess being a little bit of a control freak, I said, well, you're not going to tell me what to do. And I went and I shopped because I wanted to find, I figured I wanted to have something to fall back on, and I wanted to get some kind of training besides digging a hole. I shopped every service, and the best deal I could get was with the Navy. They promised, that they're the only ones that promised me a school. So, okay, I signed up for that. Going through Great Lakes, got talking to the detailer, and he suggested submarines, and I said, sure, why not? It would put me in Connecticut. At that time, I lived in Danbury, Connecticut, so I figured, well, that's close to home. So I signed up for submarines and got sent to New London, went through sub school at New London, and basically the sub school was psychological testings and see if you could stand the confinement and whatever, and other psychological problems. And if you had the joke was if you didn't pass the psychological testing, you were okay for submarines. So also what they taught you at sub school was it's anything. If you leave the upper base and you go down to the lower base, at minimum, it's confidential information. You're not supposed to be talking to anybody. That's why it's called a silent service, is because they got burnt pretty bad during World War II. And listening to different people talk here, I had a lot of flashbacks, and one of them was about the politicians. During World War II, 2 congressmen visiting spilled the beans. One of them spilled the beans about, he came home and he was so proud to let everybody know that he found out that we broke the Japanese code. That didn't create as much of a problem as the one that came a little bit later on, who said to Congress, don't worry about the boys on submarines because the Japs are setting their depth charges too low. And that did it. And the admirals at that time said that caused 10 subs and 800 men. Because right after that, they started setting the depth charges at a lower rate, and that's when he started getting our boats. Yeah, so again, it's called the silent service, like I say, and so anything that happened down below.
Loose lipstick chips.
Yeah, well, that's it. So basically, at that time, if you'd asked me back then what we did, the story was, even between from one boat to the other boat, we'd basically say we went out, we came back. That's all we could tell you. The number of dives equal the number of surfaces, that was the technical part, and that's it. But somewhere along in the 80s, Gary Walker did the worst damage that anybody could ever do to the submarine service. Our job back when I was in, we would go up and sit off of the Russian ports. Actually, we'd go into the Russian ports and pick up any kind of ship that came out, and we'd trail them and take audios of them, take pictures of them. And we would, actually there were times when there'd be a Russian surface ship, we would sink right underneath it and take pictures of everything underneath them, so we could know what their propellers look like, what their underside look like. And the recordings that we took would be taken back to New London, and they could tell everything that was on that ship because they could filter and filter and filter and filter, and then we basically knew the signature of every Russian ship that they had. There were times, I stood sonar watches when I was in. So I was right in the middle of all that kind of stuff. And the sonar that you might be familiar with is the pinging. We only did that if we were in a high-speed transit, because we were so noisy then that we couldn't hear anything anyways. Probably 99% of the time, we had what's called passive sonar, where we just sit and listen to the ocean. And that's how we would find out where the ships were coming. And if we'd pick up a Russian ship coming out, they say we'd go underneath it, take pictures of it. I remember going underneath one, and actually we could hear the people talking inside, because sound travels through water a lot, 10 times better than it does through air. So there were quite a bit of things like that. And one of the things that Gary Walker gave up was this thing called SOSIS, which is the entire ocean is bugged. And Russians didn't know that. So at any given time, if they would come out, they would go anywhere, we knew where they were. And we would come up every 6 hours, we'd lay a wire, we had a trailing wire that we wouldn't come up to the surface, we'd just lay the wire out behind us, and that would pick up a transmission from New London. And they would tell us that there'd be a boat in our area or a ship in our area, because SOSIS had picked it up, and to expect it at such and such a time. So we'd sit on station, we'd wait, and sooner or later along comes a sub. We could pick them up about 20 miles away from us. We could hear them coming and fall in line and get behind them. At that time, we could stay behind them and we could trail them for days on end. In fact, one of the greatest achievements we ever had was not my boat, but one of the other boats got behind a missile-type submarine, trailed it from Russia all the way over to the United States, because as we were sitting over there waiting for them, they were sitting over here waiting, looking at us. But they actually trailed them for their entire op period, and got their op areas figured out. They found out what they were doing, and the Russians never knew. They trailed them right back home again. Gary Walker told them that we were behind them. And so what we were doing at the time, we would go along for maybe 2 or 3 hours, random times actually, and all of a sudden make a turn, it's called clearing the baffles, because behind us we couldn't hear. So we would turn around and listen. They weren't doing that. It was just one of the dumbest things that I've ever seen. Well, Gary Walker told them, clear your baffles, and sure enough, that's when they started doing the Crazy Ivan. If you've ever seen Red October, that's where the sub would go along and all of a sudden turn around. And they got crazy about it because they would do a high-speed run back towards whoever's behind them. And that's where we started getting collisions that you'd never hear about, and you won't hear about, and you didn't hear about it tonight either.
When were you involved in the SOSIS work?
Pardon me?
What year, do you remember? What year were you involved in?
I was in 66 to the beginning of 66 to the very end of 69. Oh,
You and I got to chat afterwards.
okay.
We got something in common on that one. But, yeah, Walter's used a couple of acronyms. Sonar. Anybody know what sonar stands for? It's an acronym. Sound, navigation, and ranging?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what it is. What's SOSIS? I forgot.
Yeah. I think it's a sound-operated surveillance.
Under sea, or
It might be under sea, yeah.
It could have been as simple as
I
that.
think it was sound-operated surveillance, but it was basically we just laid hydrophones all over the ocean, and would sit and somebody in Bermuda, that's where one of the SOSIS stations was,
That's right.
would sit there and they'd listen and then they'd record it, and then the message would go out on an ultra-high frequency that we would pick up with our antennas. But the other things that, if you ever get interested in what kind of things that we've done, this came out after Gary Walker. This would never have come out if it hadn't been for Gary Walker. It's called Blind Man's Bluff, and it tells about the different kind of operations. One of the greatest coups we ever pulled off, and Walker gave it away, was there was a submarine base on an island off of Russia, and we wanted to somehow figure out how to get their information. And we knew that they were running landlines over to the submarine base. So it was a simple little fix. They said, check your spy satellites and see where it says cable crossing, but obviously cable crossing in Russia. Because we did the same thing. If there was a cable going across the waterways, we'd put cable crossing, do not anchor. Well, they saw that with the spy satellite, and I believe it was the halibut, went in, sat on the bottom, men got out, and they put a tap on the communications line. Every 6 months, they would go back and pick it up, and that went on for quite a few years. But then one time they found out they were waited for, and that came about as close to a hot incident as it could have been. But again, there's a lot of things like that that Blind Man's Bluff tells about. Like you say, it wouldn't have come out if it wasn't for Walker. One of the best operations we ever did, and that's a picture of 57, is the ship I was on, the skate surfaced through the ice. But we did an under ice trip, and basically we were trying to find out if FPMs, or ballistic missile type submarines, could operate underneath the polar ice cap, and if they had to surface or find a hole and shoot. The holes are called polinyas, and yes, we found a number of polinyas. We averaged them out about every 17 miles. There'd be a hole in the ice pack. We surfaced 3 times up through it, just like that picture shows you there, and just to show we could surf it. We'd actually come in, we'd hover for a while, do a sonar sweep above us and a sonar sweep in front of us, and then come up. On the undersea, when we were under the ice pack, we had 2 types of sonars, and again, I stood sonar watch, where we would sweep in front of us with the sonar, and then also sweep on top of us, keeping track. It was all scientific data that we were collecting. But the ice pack usually was 5 feet above us. We came across, and I was on the stack at the time, we came across a peak in front of us that we were at 100 feet, and that peak came down 97 feet. But again, that's what the sonar is there for, is the sweep picked it up well before we got there, so we were able to go underneath it. But that was where ridges of the ice came together and actually pushed down. So that was an exciting trip, because we did get to look at the underside of the ice pack with the periscope. We all had a chance, so that's something I had hundreds of pictures and I lost them in a flood. So it's a shame. On the Russian trips, we pulled right up into their ports and we took pictures of them sitting at their piers. And like I say, now you can do it, and I have done it on Google Earth. I went on Google Earth and I looked down at the exact same spot that we were sitting off looking at. But back then, if we had gotten caught, it would have been hot. They would have done something.
That's right.
And that's one of the things, when I was in, the Scorpion went down. And I had 2 friends on it. My division officer was the XO on the Scorpion. And we had a quartermaster on board skate. When we were in Virginia in the yards, his wife lobbied his congressman to get him transferred off the skate to some other Virginia boat, because she wanted to stay in Virginia. We had been in the yards for 2 years before I got on it. So she wanted to stay in Virginia, so she lobbied her congressman. She got the transfer. He got the Scorpion. And he went down as he was a quartermaster on board. So
Why did the ship that Russians
the conspiracy theory was, again, she was in the Med, and that's another trip we had made too. In the Med, we followed Russian ships, they followed Russian ships. The conspiracy theory is possibly something, because there were Russian ships in the area when they went down. But also it could have been, another theory is that it could have been a hot run on a torpedo. because they found her facing the other direction, which is an immediate maneuver after World War II, when all the torpedoes would actually circle around and come back, they put something in it so if they did do a 180 turn, they would shut down. So that's one of the things, if you got a hot run, you immediately turn to 180 degrees. But that could have been her spiraling down too, because it took her 20 minutes from Solstice, again, picked that up, from the first explosion that Solstice heard until the final crush explosion, took 20 minutes. So they were trying to save it. So, we don't really know.
Walt has experienced a scenario in the Navy that you don't think of. It's fascinating, and you would think that listening to him, he's giving you a lot of information maybe you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Now,
I can't let you out of here
No.
after this. No, again, Gary Walker gave it all away. I mean, I wouldn't be saying, honestly,
now,
before Walker, it would have been, we went out, we came back, and that's all. And that, like I say, that was between even boats. If you saw a boat getting its number painted over and welders welding down everything that was loose, you knew they were going north.
You have to explain to Gary Walker.
Well, Gary Walker was, I think, a Navy cryptologist. He was aware of everything that was going on. He had the codes, he had the op areas, he had everything, and he sold it.
When I get home, I'm gonna call Jimmy Carter and tell him about that. You know that.
I think Gary Walker was dead, by the way. I think he just died, or one of the big spies just died a little while ago. So.
Were you in a Nautilus class?
No, it was actually skate class. It was his own class. There were 4 boats that were in the skate class. He came up. We were basically a diesel boat with a reactor. We weren't teardrop shaped. We were the 3rd nuke built time in 1957. Something that has always shocked people too. We'd go out for 3 months at a time. We'd dive, and maybe 2.5 months later, we'd come up and see the sun again. Yeah, but it gets better. Because in that 2.5 months, any water that we made went to the battery. That meant no showers. So, try going 2.5 months. We had water to wash with.
Navy showers.
Yeah, basically, you got the washcloth wet, and that was it. And you just scrub down with it. But everybody smelled the same. When they opened up the hatch, green air escaped. So, things you miss after about a week. You miss salads, greens,
yes.
milk, and then it was all powdered milk, and then it was all canned. But we ate good. I mean, the meat was good. The meals were good. We had the great cooks. We had one bad cook, and he was gone. It took one trip. And,
You torpedoed him.
well, when everybody lined up, took their trays, put the food on it, took the trays and dumped it, the wardroom got the message. He was bad. So, yeah, we did get good food, and again, that was the morale thing that
Navy gets the gravy and the Army gets the beans.
I'll tell you, the memories have been flooding for me and to hear. Yes.
One other thing, I mean, listening to people, coming back is the hardest thing, because my kids couldn't have balloons, for instance, because if you're on ship, you sleep with a slight hum in the air. If the hum shuts down, you're awake because things happen. We had 2 fires and 2 floods, and that's usually something stops, or if there's a very, very loud noise. I couldn't take very loud noises. If I heard a loud noise, I'd just go into panic, because you know something happened. And, the first big flood we had, we came out of the yards. We had a first lieutenant who was a deck officer who was, for 2 years they were in the yard, so he had no experience. He didn't dog the forward hatch. So we were going 1/3 speed, and we secured maneuvering watch. I went down into the forward torpedo room, and I got in my bunk because it was nasty. It was bad. I was getting seasick. And my bunk was right by the forward hatch. When we hit speed, all ahead full, the bow submerged, the hatch flipped back and we had water coming, because the inside hatch hadn't been dogged yet, because that's, the procedure was to do it later on. And the torpedo room watch was on the toilet with his pants down around his ankles. And there's nothing more you can do, but you watch the door slam, and now it's me and him in there. And fortunately, I'd been through that hatch so many times when we were in the yards that I knew where the dog was, and I hit the dog, and I shut the hatch, and he pulled his pants off. But at that time, we had over a foot of water in the thing. That was scary. But even scarier was when something else happened in another room, then that door shut, and you could see a little hole, and you could see people fighting with fire in the other room. So it's things happen, and what happened on my ship was not as bad as some of the other ships. Look up the USS Chopper and see the ride that she took. Down angles like that, up angles like that, then she blew out, and she came right back down backwards. So they went through hell for probably half an hour trying to save the boat, and they saved it. But things happen on board ship when you're, and that's what I say, the loud noises, I couldn't take loud noises when I first got out. My kids still can't have balloons, so.
Code word, in the yards, to me, it's in the shipyards for repair. Ships have to be overhauled periodically, every 2 or 3 years. And you have to go into the shipyards and literally take the ship, and not out of the water, but you put it up on blocks essentially, and then fix the hull or do whatever you have to do with the internal machinery. So that's what in the yards means.
Mine looked like Swiss cheese when I reported on board. My family drove me down, after sub-school, they drove me down to Norfolk, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. I walked down a pier, and I could see from one side to the other, because they were, after the thresher went down, they had a thing called sub-safe program where they repiped everything to make it safer. So they had to completely strip the ship out. In order to do that, they just cut great big holes as big as that door, or even bigger, to pull machinery out and put new machinery in. So I looked at that and I said, it's never going to work, but they put it back together again.
Okay, now, we have a contract with you. The contract is up. We have talked you to death. But I tell you what, the 4 of us will stay here until midnight if you want to hear more sea stories. We have them, and they're all
No, you don't
fascinating, one
want
better
sea
than
stories.
the other. Irene.
Stan, I'd like to share a story with everyone. My aunt and I and several other people, 14 of us, went to Italy. And we had the great honor to go and visit our family's hometown, Fundi, which I think you've all heard about. And while we were there, Noreen Bartolomucci, who is a resident of Millbrook and goes to Fundi very often, introduced us to a friend of hers who's in her mid-80s, and she invited us to her home for lunch. And she told us the story of World War II and how the Germans came into town. All the people in Fundi ran to the mountains because of all the fighting going on. And she became very emotional telling us all about it. They went into the caves and lived there, and each family had their own little spot in the caves, and it was very cold, and some of the people never made it out of the caves. She said that she would hear every day bombing, and as a young child would cover her ears, trying not to hear it. And then at night they'd look out and see their town below, the sky lit up red. And she said that went on, and finally one day they heard massive bombs. The sky was as red as could be. And she said they didn't know what was going on, but what had happened was the Germans had an ammunition plant there, and they had bombed that plant. And the Americans, the Americans came in and bombed the plant that day or evening, and she said they were so scared. They, finally everything stopped, they got out, they, saw life was different down in the valley, and started going back, not knowing what they would find. A lot of them, they had nothing left. And she said, and I get emotional, how grateful she is and that country to the Americans who fought to save their lives and gave up their lives to help strangers. So I just wanted to share that because it goes with things.
It's a fine story.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, and she was crying while she was, talking about
Well, that she was.
it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's, wow, 10 after 9. You've been a great audience. You've been very patient with us. You've listened to us. We really appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Do you wanna hear from a World War II vet?
Not tonight. Kill us with that tomorrow.
You know what I'm sensing here? We're gonna have to have another next year, the year beyond, whatever it is. There are so many stories that we have not even told. We could probably we could go round robin and tell story after story after story. I got half a dozen, I can stay here till midnight. But okay, fine, that's what it is. Thank you very much for being with us. We do have refreshments over there.